We normally start our budget process, October, November the year before. And of course, during that time, we had bushfires. Then in February, the planning workshop that we had with council was actually disrupted by the flood. And then soon after that, in March, COVID hit. So the operational plan or budget that we put out on exhibition to the community soon after that was pre-COVID. And so we had to sit down and determine what the likely impact of COVID was going to be on the budget. Fortunately, the state government has allowed us to defer the budget preparation process. So normally we have to have a budget prepared and delivered before the 30th of June for 1 July, of course. But we were allowed to push it out to the end of July, which is just what we've done. So I guess what we did, we sat back and said, look, we really need to look at the budget with a fresh set of eyes. And there's 4 underlying principles in the budget based on the changes that we've seen, particularly with COVID and bushfires and floods. The first of those is that we have to live within our means. It's no different to your household budget. When you suddenly have a budget shock, you have to adjust your spending and look at that. The second one is that we have to continue to deliver the essential services that the community expects. We can't be like any other businesses and say, okay, well, we're suddenly just not going to deliver this anymore. People expect their bins to be picked up, they expect to turn the tap on, have water come out, flush their toilet, all of those sorts of things. So that's a key underlying principle. The third one is around minimising job losses. So in times like this, it's very easy to try and correct the budget by simply laying off staff. And we decided that wasn't the way that we were going to do it. It's a very crude and lazy way of trying to achieve a budget position, but we wanted to minimise job losses because about 92% of our staff are Central Coast residents. They live here, they pay rates, they're part of the community, and the impact of that would be devastating for the community. And then the fourth principle is really about stimulating the local economy. So as a form of government, the closest form of government to the people, we always like to say, we do have a role and responsibility in stimulating the local economy. So again, we could have pulled the shutters down and said, okay, we're not going to do any spending this year. And in fact, we've got one of the largest capital works programs that Central Coast Council has ever seen, which is $225 million. And there's another $33 million worth of projects that are in a what we call a gated position, waiting to hear whether we've got grant funding for that. So, those are the underlying principles. It has been challenging. We've had to look for savings. We've had to look at things differently. I think local governments in the past have been quite complacent in terms of their income because it's just been steady in terms of rates and fees and charges. But as we've seen with COVID and the public health orders and the restrictions and closures of libraries and leisure facilities and theatres, it's really hit the council's bottom line. So in round figures, it's a $500 million budget, and everyone's throwing around billions at the moment, so why don't we? But $564 million. And as I said, there's another $225 million worth of capital works that are being spent. So it is a significant budget. When we went out on exhibition, we proposed a $32.5 million deficit, which basically means that we weren't living within our means, and so we tried really hard to claw that back. We've got it back to a $13.3 million deficit, which is better, but is still not ideal. And ideal would be a balanced budget. But clearly with the impacts of COVID, as you say, we have to balance those competing priorities and say, well, okay, if we did want to achieve a balanced budget, it would mean we would have to cut another $13.3 million worth of services, and we're not quite sure whether that's what the community is expecting right now. Yeah, when we look at past years, I think from the date of amalgamation from the 12th of May 2016 until the end of the previous financial year, 30th of June 2019, we had accumulated $72.9 million worth of surplus. And we are unfortunately steadily eroding that. There are a number of reasons for that. Probably the largest one for that, which is, I suppose, bad news for council, but good news for the ratepayer, is that with the IPART determination in May last year, that resulted in a $35 million loss of revenue. Now, there's very few organisations that can weather that loss, in a very short space of time. So that was a double whammy, because we had a reduction in income, but IPART also expected us to continue delivering the same level of services and in fact increase some of our spend. So
that was just to be clear, IPART's the independent tribunal for pricing in New South Wales, and that was to do with rates and fees and charges, is that correct?
Yeah, so we are one of 3 water authorities in New South Wales, and people tend to forget this, that the Central Coast Council is a water authority, the same as Sydney Water and Hunter Water. So every few years we get assessed by IPART, the tribunal, as an independent umpire, if you like, because we are a monopoly provider, and they assess what water rates and fees we are charging and what we should be delivering in terms of services to the community, and they will set the prices for us. Obviously, we have an opportunity for input, but at the end of the day, they say, right, that's what it is, and you have to live with it. So, as I say, from the ratepayers' perspective, it's great because they saw their water prices go down, and of course, there's also been, I should say, probably a triple whammy in that we had a reduction in income as a result of those prices. We've also had, the reduction in usage because we went to level 1 restrictions. So, we also tend to forget that prior to the bushfires, we were in a period of considerable drought. It's looking a lot better now with Mangrove Creek Dam sort of nudging the 56-57% mark, whereas previously, we were really struggling and looking at facing more severe water restrictions, which would have meant, less income again. People may have been surprised at the cost, and that's our best estimate. There are probably other hidden costs and indirect costs that we haven't really captured, such as while we've been doing that, there's an opportunity cost that we haven't been able to do something else, which some members of the community would say would be more value add. And it's also important to note that it's not yet done, so we still have some more work to be done in terms of the consolidation of our core systems, most notably the property and rating system, which is very challenging, and we have to get that done because we're doing a rates harmonisation this year now. And then we've also still got a number of planning instruments that are yet to be consolidated, so the local environment plan, the development control plans, and I think there's about 51 developer contribution plans that we're starting to get together. But yeah, when you look at that at 40 maybe potentially 50 million of costs that we've had to simply absorb on top of business as usual, it's that's part of the reason why that's happening. I think the other thing too, and you touched on it, is Central Coast is one of the larger councils the 3rd largest in New South Wales and 6th largest in Australia, and we're growing at about 0.9% population each year, and yet our rating base only grows at 0.5% each year. So what I mean by that is that the number of rateable properties from which we source our income only grows at about half the rate of our population. And it kind of makes sense, because if you take a new house being built and potentially 2 people on the house, those people generate demand for water and sewer and playgrounds and footpaths and all of those sort of things, and yet we're only getting rating from 1 property. So that's why one of the things that we've started doing now and will be completed at the end of this calendar year in December and then we'll start the community engagement as we start developing our new budget for next year, is what we're calling a service review. So obviously with amalgamated councils, the two former councils had different sets of services, different standards, different ways of doing things, and it's opportune now to look at that and go, okay, so while we are now one Central Coast, what is the basket of services that the community expects? What are they prepared to pay for? What is the standard that they want? Are some services potentially more gold-plated, if you like, than what people would necessarily be prepared to pay for? And are there some services where we need to lift our game and people are saying, well, no, we actually want more from you, but being very upfront about what that is likely to cost and what we can afford, going back to that principle of living within our means. Yeah, look, waste levies are a really vexed issue across New South Wales, and you're right, Central Coast Council is not unique in that sense, and I know our peak body, Local Government New South Wales, has been banging on this for quite some time. When you take New South Wales waste levy and then you start adding all of the other waste levies, I think in round figures there's about $1 billion of waste levies across Australia that have been collected. And at a time when you have the China sword and the crisis of recycling and those sorts of things, the community are rightfully saying, well, how is this money that we've had to pay to the various state governments, how is this being used to try and address the pressing issue of plastic and all of those sorts of things? So I think we and the council has advocated very strongly on this, that the $32.9 million, $33 million worth of waste levy that we collect on behalf of the state government, and what we get back in terms of having to compete for various projects is very minimal. So what we're saying is we think that the waste levy is still a really good idea because it creates the incentive to do the right thing instead of just putting everything in the hole in the ground, and looking at the waste avoidance and even more mature than that, looking at the circular economy and saying, how can we actually prevent waste from happening in the first place? But we would really like the ability to explore using that $32 million each and every year in a much more productive way than what appears to be happening now. Yeah, it's a good question. It was also interesting. The Deputy Mayor raised something from the Audit Office. There was a question raised in relation to another merged council who was also struggling with deficits, and there was a request for the Auditor General to do a performance audit on that council to determine how they were performing and whether things were working, given it was an amalgamation. And the response was that the benefits realisation that the New South Wales government did in the amalgamation process was over a 20-year horizon, not 10. So the response from the Auditor General was, we're not going to do a performance audit 3 years into an amalgamation because we won't see the benefits of that. I think, part of the, when you go back to, Destination 2036, as it was called in 2011, and the various iterations, it started off as the sector itself saying, we need to be more efficient and we need some help, but I don't think they really expected forced amalgamations to be thrust on them. The New South Wales government did talk about this concept of scale and capacity, and I think that's probably one area where Central Coast Council can derive the benefits from. So over the last 2 years, for example, we have been really successful in securing both state and federal grants, so over $200 million worth of that.
We're going to come to that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the areas there. So in the advocacy space, I think that's where one of the real benefits are. Obviously prior to my time, but I've heard from various councillors and staff about the two former councils almost falling over each other in terms of trying to seek funding or advocate a particular position. So Central Coast Council is unique in the sense that we don't have a joint organisation. We are our joint organisation. we have a seat around the regional leadership executive, which is the head of all the state agencies. So, you know, having that important seat at the table is really valuable, and I think that's where we'll start to see some of those benefits come forward. I think in terms of the savings overall, it's interesting that when we compare our rates that we pay on the Central Coast here compared to some of our neighbours, if we were to charge what some of our neighbours are charging, we would be getting an extra $70 million worth of rates. So, you know, while people always complain about their rates, I think in terms of the services that we provide in comparison with some of our neighbours, I think we're doing okay. There's always room for improvement, but I think some of those benefits will take time. You know, as I said, the consolidation piece will take another couple of years, and then as we start moving through that, I think we should see some efficiencies. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to say based on the output. I think one of the concerns that we have, and as you say, that you know they're a one-off, apart from the financial assistance grants that we get from the Commonwealth, which are year on year. And I guess the concern that we have is that both the state and Commonwealth, like all levels of government, are struggling with COVID at the moment, running up record deficits in an effort to keep the economy going. And we just wonder about whether some of those grant programs are going to continue. So the economic stimulus packages will, I'm sure, continue as long as the governments can. But some of the other grant programs for, you know, probably some of the so-called softer areas of community development and the arts and culture may not be there as much in the future. I may be wrong, but potentially that's something that we have to be mindful of. It is also dependent on, you know, I guess getting that sweet spot of the alignment of the grant programs that are out there and what we actually need to put in place on the Central Coast. I think a number of councils have fallen into the trap of what I call grant chasing. So you go and chase the money, you know, and there's no strategic alignment. So I think we've been able to find that alignment and deliver projects that the community needs and wants, rather than you know, developing. Some people may argue with that. I know Terrigal Boardwalk is one, just putting it out there that that's a polarising project, but certainly it's one that we obviously have been successful in securing grant for. Basically sort of two categories. There's one around our operational savings. So we've really looked hard at our staffing and looked at things that most other businesses would do very hard. So we've looked at things like overtime, excess leave, our recruitment. So, you know, at any one time we'll have a couple hundred vacancies. So what we've said is we're not simply going to replace those people in line with our principle of minimising job losses. So, you know, that is going to be tough because there are going to be a number of vacancies that are going to be held for quite some time. In terms of some of the deferred works, again, the principles that we employed to try and prioritise what we were going to do and what we weren't. So clearly, if there was a project that had already started, like Mighty to Warnervale Pipeline, one of the largest projects that we've got, it didn't make sense to stop that. It's a key strategic project, so that will continue. Things like Adcock Park and Colongra will continue. Then we started looking at what are those safety and risk projects that if we did not do that, we'd obviously be putting the community and potentially our staff at risk. So where we have identified those projects, we will do that. Then the second category is around grant funding, as we just spoken about. So unashamedly, we say, look, we want to spend other people's money first rather than ours. So, you know, where we have got, whether it's 100% grant funded or part grant funded projects, we will make those a priority. The third category is looking at the developer contributions component. So again, not drawing on the general revenue, but drawing on accumulated funds that we have, which is in the order of about 200 million, and making sure that we give that priority, because the development community have rightly said, look, you've taken this money for us, for community development, when are you going to deliver? So we now have an active program over the next 4 years to actively draw down on those.
And the state government's given you some leniency in spending that money, haven't they?
Correct. So as part of the COVID stimulus package, the government has allowed us to pool some of those funds, which gives us greater flexibility. I can spend all day talking about developer contributions and the technicalities around that, but in essence what they've done is said, look, let's just loosen the rules. We're not breaking rules, but just allowing you to pool funds to make sure that you do get some projects over the line, because that's always been the challenge, that the projects have never been 100% funded from developer contributions. There's always a local contribution component. So we were able to do that, and then the remaining categories in terms of priorities are around, obviously, infrastructure backlogs and making sure we're not getting any worse. But some of the projects that have been deferred will be what we might consider to be the nice to have. So if there's new playgrounds or new footpaths or those sorts of things that are not grant funded or not developer contribution funded, we've deferred them until the situation improves, hopefully. Yeah, I think it's been an interesting one, because you're right, the stadium generates its revenue obviously through activity and through the people who come in the gates. I think on the positive side, what we've seen is we've managed to host the Central Coast Warriors, the New Zealand Warriors, here on the Central Coast, and that has created incredible exposure for not just the stadium but the Central Coast.
We've noticed that you put Central Coast on the seats.
Yeah, that was
when we see the games now.
Yeah, that's right, and it was a masterstroke from one of our staff to actually suggest that, and particularly with the empty stadiums, you just can't help but notice that. So I think that may have a long-term benefit, because we certainly have always been on the outer in terms of games, with priority going to Sydney and Newcastle, but we've secured a number of NRL games and of course now the A-League, and we are working really closely with the Mariners and Football Australia in terms of the upcoming Women's World Cup, which is really exciting. So hopefully we can get some benefit from that. But you're right, overall, if you look at the stadium, you look at the theatres and some of our leisure centres, they have been severely impacted. Our estimate in terms of the budget that we've got now is that that's about $9 million of direct revenue that we will not get.
Yeah.
I think it's about 19 or 20,000 small businesses on the Central Coast. They're the backbone of every economy. While we do have some major businesses on the coast, particularly in the food sector, it is those small businesses that drive our local economy. And so there's a number of aspects to it. The one is the direct investment. So that 225 million that I spoke about, we normally work on a rule of thumb, about $150 million of that goes directly into the local economy in terms of tradespeople, goods and services, supplies, etc., etc. So that's quite a significant injection. But you're right. I think we also been looking at the COVID economic task force and also social task force that we've established to try and help businesses navigate and pivot the current buzzword from what they're doing now. And we've seen some of our businesses do that really successfully. So a number of distilleries and breweries have pivoted to making hand sanitizer, for example. And also we've had a few innovation series online, which in itself was a bit of an innovation. And I know talking to the staff who arranged that, the first one, which was done in person and we had to pay for speakers and what have you, cost a few $1,000s, and now suddenly you do it online and it's a couple $100s. So we're going, well, beauty, let's keep on doing this.
Well, possibly even better, because you can sit in your pajamas and watch it.
That's right. So you don't have all those carbon emissions of people travelling in there and et cetera, et cetera. But it's certainly trying to, I guess, open the eyes to our local businesses of, this brave new online world and how things might change and how they can adapt. And we've, as I said, there are some really good examples of that. I'd be disappointed if you didn't ask that, though. So yes, we announced that with a lot of fanfare, and I suppose, like with everything else with COVID, it slowed down slower than we would have liked. But I always talk that there's three aspects to that. The one is the technology aspect, which we're working closely with various technology partners on. The second is the human aspect, and I think that's what we've seen, particularly with the 44,000 commuters who used to travel to Sydney every day, and maybe no longer, but that getting over that fear of remote working, both from an employer and employee perspective. So that is, in some ways, COVID has been benefit in making people aware of that. And then the other bit is the commercial space. So if people are not commuting to Sydney, then where do they establish? And so we have seen quite a few co-working hubs, and in fact Central Coast Council has one right here in Gosford, and I know there's one in Erina and Tuggerah as well. So we might see again a business opportunity for people to look at that. But to answer your question, I think we're probably going a little bit slow, and it might be towards the back end of this year. But it's not the only initiative that we have. I mean, we obviously announced recently with Minister Dominello the e-planning initiative.
Yes. Yeah.
We've also got the smart parking initiative, and there'll be a number of other ones as well. And also, you did remind me earlier about one of the things that we are investing in the budget is LED street lighting to reduce our energy and carbon footprint, and also rolling out a significant amount of solar, which obviously don't need to tell people.
Well, you get a big saving dividend. We saw in the budget the reported several $100,000.
Yeah, that's right, and that's year on year, so it's an ongoing saving. Yeah.